Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Tuesday training session. We have a nice group of presenters here for you this morning that will be able to talk to you about the Unified Procurement Program. And the Unified Procurement Program covers joint purchasing and a variety of other kinds of purchasing, but today we're here to talk specifically about a release off of a multiple award contract. So we'll get into some details of it, what exactly is a release off of a multiple award contract in a minute. We have Michelle Casey with us today. Michelle is with the CPO General Services Office, and she is a Senior Policy Advisor. We also have Sandy Robinson. Sandy is an Estate Purchasing Officer and a little bit newer with our organization, but very familiar with the Multiple Award and the UP program. And we also have Samantha Culton, and I am Lori Lawton, and you hear me a lot, so I don't think I need any introductions because I talk to you every week. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And just for a couple of housekeeping items before we get started, if you do have any questions, as usual, go ahead and type them into the chat box. We'll be checking that periodically. If it's relevant to what we're currently talking about, we may stop and answer your question right away. However, if it's something that, is somewhat related, we may wait until the end to circle back around and answer questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Casey, and the objectives or goals for today are to discuss a release off a multiple award master contract to let you know exactly what that is. You will then go through the process to create a rec. You'll understand the process for preparing the release. You'll understand the process of a release and bid buy, and you will get some better familiarity with the reminder functionality because that's how approvals are documented in this process, and you will create a purchase order. So what is a multiple award master contract? Generally, it's one of numerous contracts for a supply or service, for a similar or an exact supply or service. In general services, we are accustomed to primary, secondary, and tertiary multiple award contracts, as well as multiple award contracts where the vendors are based on geographical areas. But we're not used to what is frequently seen in the cooperative purchasing arena. In cooperative purchasing, the cooperatives award a contract to multiple vendors for the same or substantially similar supply or service. This allows states to use the contract as their state laws allow. Because multiple vendors have a contract that may meet an agency's need, for Illinois' purposes, we need a process to determine that a vendor has the lowest cost that meets an agency's specific need as necessary. So for all CPO-GS multiple award contracts, a CPO notice will be issued, and in that CPO notice, it will state who the vendors are that have a particular contract and will provide a brief overview of the offerings. The CPO notice will direct agencies to the UP process manual, and documents that are detailed in the UP process manual will be on the UP page of the CPO-GS's webpage. So this process first starts with a multiple award master contract request for quotes. And here is a screenshot of what that looks like. I'm now going to turn it over to Sandy to take you through this process.
Okay. In order to make the determination as to the vendor that will be utilized for the procurement, there will need to be a secondary process for pricing that is conducted utilizing this request for quote document. And so in your contract notification, The documents will be there, and the SPO determination that will come later in the process will be based upon the information that is gathered here at this stage. So in the request for quote, we'll have to look at the contract that's been released and find the contact information for the vendors that are applicable. Let's use for our example today mailing machines, which there's some that will be our first one that comes through. In a mailing machine contract, it will list all the contact persons for those that will be necessary for this request for quote to be sent to. So I'm going to switch over to the actual form and begin to complete that. I think I am. Looks like it popped up. And we'll do Word document.
Okay. Hold on while we, yeah, there we go.
Well, as we're pulling the document up, the agency will obviously have to develop specifications for what the agency need is, which will then be outlined as a part of this request for quote. The master contract will have the contact information for each of the vendors that are applicable for this acquisition, and then we will begin to fill out this form accordingly. What we want to emphasize is that the agency and the SPOs should be in pretty close contact as this process is developed to make sure that all of the proper procurement code guidelines are followed as it relates to name brand procurements and other things of that nature to make sure that we are following code. We're getting close. There we go. Okay. And so as we talk about the specifications that will have to be developed in conjunction with your SPO, for instance, taking into consideration the performance-driven needs of the agency as opposed to a name brand specification. So we're going to need to consider things like the letters per minute speed of the machine or the page per minute speed. We have to take a look at the volume class of the particular machine that we're looking for, other attributes as to whether we want a folder or inserter, and then the software capabilities that may come with a particular machine as we're developing those specifications, because we want them to be general in nature and able to be responded to by the multiple vendors that have been awarded this contract. With that said, then you would go in and on the form, yes, there we go. On the form, you'd have to specify the date and time that you would like to have this RFQ returned, and for our purposes of our example, we'll say next Monday the 18th, and we'll say at 3 p.m. And so then we would put our agency name in, and then the address, and I believe, what are we, 401 South Spring or something like that? Jeffrey Beyer as the contact. And so this is all the basic agency information that will go here. And then, of course, as we know, for all email addresses, and so we would have, the agency would enter all of their contact information in this section, and then they're going to then put in those specifications that we talked about. And so for this particular acquisition, we would like a medium volume mailing system, and we want it to be capable of having a speed of 140 letters per minute. We'd like it to have a folder, an inserter, and a mail management software that is capable of handling materials for postcards, letters, and small packages. And we just want one of those. And so at this point, that's all that the agency would have to indicate. And then they would go to the contact page in the contract documents and email this request for quote to the applicable vendors. And in this particular case, this size machine with these capabilities would be Pitney Bowes and Neopost that they would send this request for quote to. At that point in time, we would allow the date to elapse, and once we got the request for quotes back, then we would be able to work with our SPO to do the best value determination based upon the quotes that we received, the pricing that we received, as well as the particular needs that the agency has from compatibility and other standpoint to make the determination for who we would award this to. Now, on the bottom of the page in red, that is the information that would be entered by the vendor when they were returning their quote here in this section, and then also the vendor's specific information down below, their bid buy number, their total estimated delivery time, and the date that they were responding. At that point, then we would have an idea who we'd like to award the contract to. And in this case, in our scenario, we'll say that that the best value that was determined by the agency in conjunction with their SPO was for Neopost. And at that point in time, then they would want to go back, and now we're looking at the next document that we have in our system, which is the release off of master contract document that we have available here. Oh, that one came right up. Look at that.
Okay, so after you have a selected vendor, you need to make a request to release off of a multiple award contract. So the form is very user-friendly. What you will do is select the agency, and of course the agency was specified in the request for quote. This will be the rec number from bid buy that you will put in. Lori, do you happen to have one already and train yet? No?
No, I don't.
Okay, so you'll need to come back with that. The name of the contract is Neopost MVP, which stands for National Value Point, Mailroom Equipment, Supplies, and Maintenance. Here, you do a brief description of the agency's need. And Sandy, what were some of those features?
You said that 140 letters per minute, folder, inserter, mail management software.
As we stated, you'll find out how many vendors are able to meet this need through their master contracts, and the CPO notice will tell you the names of the vendors. In this particular scenario, the names of the vendors are Neopost and Pitney Bowes. The date the responses were due back from the vendors was the 18th. And they were sent. We'll use the 13th. Brand name specs were not used. If brand name specifications were used, the agency is required to state why they were used using the standard found in the administrative code at 1.2050. And if these standards can't be met, the brand name spec is not justified. And so that's why we stated it's important to involve your SPO early in the process when you're developing the specifications, so that you don't get to the end of the process and you end up not gaining the approval to go with a particular vendor. For example, when a particular vendor or a brand name specification would be permissible is if you have, for instance, some other piece of equipment that is brand name, for instance, Pitney Bowes, and you just need an accessory or something ancillary to that piece of equipment that you already own. In that scenario, the brand name, because of compatibility with existing equipment, would be justified. Another scenario possibly could be if you have a postage meter that has a lot of postage left on it, and it is a Pitney Bowes postage meter. As we stated earlier, Neopost is the name of the vendor. We will assume that to make it easy, that their quote was $10,000. They are the low cost, low price vendor. The only other vendor, of course, who responded is Pitney Bowes. There isn't another vendor who could possibly meet this need. The agency will then sign it and date it. And then there are some processes that will occur in bid buy so that this actual request can advance from your SPO to UP, where UP will provide comments regarding the approval or disapproval of this request. And after that is achieved, it goes back to the SPO for the SPO to complete the rest of the procurement and make a determination. With that, I will hand it back over to the bid buy group to show you exactly how these documents will attach in bid buy and the rest of the rec process is handled.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so what you've seen so far is the process for getting the approval to go ahead and do a release off of a full award contract. And you've also seen the process of getting quotes from your multiple vendors to assure that you are using the contract that will provide the best value to the state. So let me pull this up. Okay. So we talked about the information with regards to emailing the multiple award RFQ to the vendors and evaluating the responses. So you've gone through that. You filled out your complete request. Your request to award, and you know, in terms of the evaluation, the agency is the one that is making that evaluation recommendation based on low price, compatibility, and then the next step in the process is that review and approval of UP. UP will provide any comments to you, send that back, and then ultimately the final determination as it relates to your procurement will be done by the SPO. We have here in our slides, like we always do, a place for you to send questions. So if you have any questions as it relates to that approval process, it is the CPO UP address that you would use. So either keep this handy or write that down and make sure that you have access to the help desk for the UP program. So all of us, or I would assume most of us on the phone, have gone through and you have done releases off of, you know, just a release off of a master contract before. This is all very similar to that. There's not a lot of additional steps that you need to do, but there are a few additional steps that you need to do when you're doing the release off of a multiple award. You are doing a direct release. The rec is released directly from the agency and does go to the vendor. When the requisition is approved, bid buy auto-generates the release purchase order and sends it. So basically, the steps for creating a release in this particular case is that you're going to create that new requisition in bid buy and, you know, going through the standard process of creating the new rec. You start with your general tab and you complete all the various portions. Specifically, what you're going to do when you're doing your new rec is establish, you know, how that requisition is actually going to be ultimately processed. So with a requisition, your requisition type should be released, and the type code should be the same type code as was used on the original procurement. Okay, on your general tab, and this is very important for a lot of reasons, some of which is reporting functions. Other reasons just include being able to quickly identify the type of procurement that is going on as the various people in the process are touching it. But on the general tab, the short description will say that this PO is subject to, and the name of whatever the cooperative is, and the cooperative agreement number, and then as well as the description of the items to be procured. So if this one will ultimately be subject to, you know, NASPO is the example that we're using. It could be another cooperative, and then that solicitation number, and then the description of the items to be procured. And that agreement number is found in the bulletin reference on the master blanket purchase order, so the purchase order that you're going to be buying off of. Okay, on your items tab, you will look up and you will add the items that you are wishing to procure from the master blanket, and you will be adding a product category line item. A product category line item is just a general line item on that master blanket purchase order. One thing to know about product category line items and why we're using something that is sort of a new concept for us is, in many cases, these master contracts that have multiple awards, they are often master contracts that have thousands of line items. So rather than, go through and have to input the thousands of line items into bid buy, we utilize product categories. In addition to the product category, you'll work with the pricing information that you have from the vendor to establish what the pricing is, and you'll also be editing the description of that product category line item, which I'll show you in a little bit, to include the specific information for the item that you're procuring. And as with everything, you'll enter your unit of measure. This says enter the pricing from the pricing book or from the specific quote that you have. And you're going to repeat that for any additional items that you have. Then we'll go through those steps in a minute. On your accounting tab, your special procurement type is joint purchasing, and then you'll say based on percentages or dollars and rebuild that for all items. So our standard processes as it relates to the accounting tab. On your attachments tab, and this is one portion of the process that is unique and different from what you're accustomed to when you're doing a standard release. At this point, you will have gone through and you will have completed documents, and so you will be attaching documents, those documents that you have as part of the procurement file, as well as information for decision-making throughout this process, but you will be attaching that request for quote, any emails that you have from vendors that you requested a quote from, all the responses from those vendors, as well as your request to release off of a multiple award contract. So all of your documentation should be attached here on your rec. That's a critical piece of information to understand. If the UP program and the SPO and any others in the process don't have all of those documents for review, that will increase the likelihood that something may be returned to you. So you want to fully document all of the steps that you have performed today. You'll also want to verify that show to vendor is not checked for any of the files or forms that should not be accessible to the public. And we all know that that's a very important step, and we're all used to doing that on a regular basis. And after you add all of your attachments, you will click Save and Continue. Here is another step in the process that is a little bit different from what we're accustomed to. So you, at this point, will go out to the Reminders tab, and you will add a reminder to the SPO to review this particular procurement. So rather than sending it off through its approval, at this point, you're using the Reminders tab to trigger the beginning of the SPO review and then ultimately the UP review and then those responses. So you remind the SPO reminds the UP program. They'll review everything that you have compiled in bid buy to ensure that it's complete and accurate. And then UP is going to provide their response via reminder, and then the SPO provides its response. So the benefit of doing all of these reminders is not only does it establish that workflow and automatically send those reminders, it then also becomes a history of when the request was made, what the responses were, if it was returned, requested for corrections. All of that information will become part of the record of this procurement. Once you have an approval and you are ready, you then submit that rec for approval. And if it is a purchase order for direct release, that would complete our process. No additional action is needed. After the approvals, the purchase order will be sent directly to the vendor. So with any luck, all of that sounds very familiar to you. There's a couple of additional steps. There's a little bit of preliminary activity, but it should, for the most part, feel like your standard process. And we've added here our email address, so if you have any questions specific to how to use bid-buy to do a release off of a multiple award contract, you would reach out to us. If you have questions about the multiple award process in general, specific to a specific contract, that's when you would reach out to the email address that we have provided you in the up portion of this presentation. So let me look up here and see if we've had any questions, and we do have a few. And I'll go through and see what we can do to answer your questions, and then we're going to conclude with doing a brief demo of the process. So we had some questions about sound. It looks like all that was just resolved. Someone says we've not received an email with attachments of these slides. We'll follow up, and we will be sending those out to everyone. A comment about some of the documents that we had that were kind of small. Hopefully when you go through and re-review this, you'll be able to see that information. Someone wanted to know, where is this form located on the CPO site?
That'll all be released with the CPO notice.
All of the documents and attachments are going to be posted and released with an upcoming CPO notice that is specific to the program, so stay tuned for that. And generally speaking, we'll host those more than likely in two places. One will be on the UP program pages, and the other will be on BidBuy. So we'll make it available in multiple places. Someone wanted to know, do we attach a form into BidBuy at the rec stage, specifically the form? Absolutely. Hopefully, we went through all of that. At the rec stage, you will be attaching all of your documentation that you have completed, including the email to the vendors requesting their quotes, as well as those vendor responses, so that there's a complete record of all of the activity, again, to ensure that we're providing best value to the state. And then someone says, will UP be in the approval path for these type of releases? And the answer to that is no. So UP will exist, that whole UP review process will exist through reminders and then reminder responses back, and we'll have a full record of the UP review and approval. Okay, so let's go out here and okay, and let me log in. I lost my key. Okay, so I am out on our trade website. I don't know if any of you can hear it, but in the background we have some drilling. So if you do, I'm going to try and talk loud. Ideally, you're not hearing that come over the phone. But basically what we're going to do here is we're going to start a new requisition. And our requisition is going to start with its short description. And in our instructions, we have said that this is subject, my typing is not working too well this morning, so let me see if I can get that right. Subject to and I am just entering in, just test data. None of this is actual data, but subject to the NASPO value point, contract number, and I would add that information in terms of the short description, and then I would include a description of the items that were being procured, and I would say mailing machine. So I would come back down here, I would enter the required date I had for my item. My requisition type is going to be a release, and I would add in here the agency reference number. If I have an agency reference number, it is not a special procurement type. There will not be a link to an original contract or an old or original contract number, and then I would be selecting my type code. That type code would be based on the procurement as originally established. In this case, it was competitive sealed bidding that was done under the original procurement. I would save that and continue. Out here on items, I would go out and I would search for the items off of the multiple award master contracts that exist out in bid buy. I can do an advanced search. I could use the actual purchase order number for that particular purchase order. I can use a description of the product. In this particular case, I'm just going to go out and just grab any old item, but you can use your advanced search functionality to find the specific product category line item that you're going to be adding. In this case, I'm just grabbing an item, and I'm going to add that to my rec. So assuming here, this is training fire extinguisher, assuming here that I had a product category line item, what I would be doing here is I would be editing that product category line item that existed on my master contract to reflect the actual items that I am purchasing. So in this particular case, if it was a product category line item, I would enter in, mailing machine, maybe the product line item number for that particular mailing machine, a description of that machine, so that I am providing the greatest amount of detail for fulfillment of my procurement. And based on that, I would do a save and exit after editing that, and then a save and continue. In this particular case, it's giving me, I'll go ahead and update that, an error, but I would save and continue. Based on the fact that I am identifying a specific vendor related to the item that I have added, you'll see that your vendor's name is going to be pre-populated here, but you do want to make sure that you take a look at your vendor remit to address and ensure that it matches the information for the vendor that you've chosen and the information that is on the related documents. You can save that and continue. You'll want to go out here and do the standard update of your address. If you have multiple addresses, multiple locations, you would go ahead and do that. In my case, everything is fine, so I will continue on with that. Out here on the accounting code, I am going to come down here, and as you know, we always have to pick a special procurement type. And as you know, in most of my demos, I always say, well, and that's not applicable. But in this particular case, you are selecting joint purchasing. So joint purchasing will become your special procurement type. So you'll choose that. You can save based on percentages, rebuild it for all items. Your routing tab is going to remain open until you have completed and you're ready to submit this. But out here on your attachments tab, that is going to be the most critical part of the information here. So as Michelle and Sandy discussed this morning, you are going to be attaching all of your quote documents, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record and repeating this over and over again, but the vendors to the emails, all the responses that you got back, your request to participate, so all of the specific documentation that is required will be attached here under attachments. You can come out here and use your notes field if you have any specific notes that you want to be able to add, but then ultimately, and very importantly, is you are going to send a reminder to the SPO, and you're going to provide a due date. So let's say we provide a due date of 3 days, and the comment will be to approve release of a multiple award contract, and I'm going to pick the SPO. In this case, I'm going to say that my SPO is Allison Moore. In terms of the due date, the days prior to remind is, let me put it 3 days out, so I'll say I want a reminder to go out right away. So if I'm 3 days out, I put 3 days prior to remind, prior to the due date. I do want an email to be sent, and then I'm going to click Save and Continue. So at this point, this is the point at which I'm going to stop, and I'm going to wait for the additional reminders that are going to be sent. The SPO is going to send this off to UpStaff. UpStaff is going to review it. UpStaff is going to provide their response for the release, and then the SPO will advise you that that has been received, and then you can go off into your Summary tab and submit for approval. At that point, this requisition is not going to route to the SPO in most cases, but the SPO has already done its review as part of that up-review process, and then you can go ahead ultimately and send that requisition, and it will immediately release out to the vendor. So, do we have any questions on that? Let's see. I don't see any new questions. So do we have any additional information, Michelle or Sandy, that you'd like to add as part of the discussion?
I don't have anything further.
And I just think that in the training materials, I think we actually tell them to do all the reminders for today and 0 days, and that way everything will happen immediately. But other than that.
Okay, great. No, that's a good piece of information. So what Sandy said, if you didn't hear them, is that in the training materials we say to send the reminder due date today with a 0 date to remind so that it goes out immediately. So that you should absolutely follow that process as it exists in the training materials. Good question. Someone says, since we don't have access to the forms yet, when does the process start?
When the CPO notice is released.
So, and the CPO notice will have the specific information about the specific multiple award contract. All the details that you need will be in there. That really will be your starting or launching point when you get ready to do a release off of a multiple award contract, is to look specifically at that CPO notice, read and understand it, and then begin the process that we've outlined here for you today. So I am going to go ahead and leave the line open for just about a minute to see if we have any last questions that come in. If not, as usual, we will have recorded this and we will have it available to you with all of the other training materials related to this process. So again, thank you, and we will wait for any additional questions. Okay, we have another question. When will the mailing equipment multiple award master contract be loaded into bid buy?
It will be loaded into bid buy as soon as the ERP team has their fix. We've been trying to get it in bid by, and there are some issues with ERP. That is kind of why these have been on hold. So we've been told that the fix will be resolved by the end of this week, so hopefully the end of this week.
Hopefully the end of this week, but again, we're dependent on some actions to occur. So it is a top priority for us, and as soon as we are able to get it in, we will begin getting it in. So ASAP.
So note that they are sitting there parked. We just cannot get through the interface. So all of the documents are sitting there with the respective vendors, and we just keep sending it, and there are interface issues. So as soon as it is able to hop over to ERP, we will issue the CPO notice.
So stay tuned for that notice. Okay, with that, and not seeing any additional questions, I think that will conclude. Again, you have those 2 help desk email addresses to reach out to with any specific questions, and of course, when the CPO notice goes out, it will be sent and distributed to all the agencies. So thank you very much, and we will see you on Thursday.